Good evening. Glad you all made it out here in the weather. I almost didn't make it here like 9 times today. On the way to the airport, then at the airport, then when the plane was about to take off, then when the plane landed, then at that other airport, then after everything else I got here and they lost my luggage, of course. And I understand how this happens. Put the bags on the plane goes up, plane comes down. Where are my bags? I don't want any boycotts or anything, but so I'm not going to name the name of the airline. I'll just say it was a very famous American airline. I lost all my stuff. Just to go along with the introduction from Ratio Christi, Ratio Christi is the only group I can think of right now on college campuses that regularly discusses topics that most other groups want to avoid at all costs. Anything that might stir up strong feelings. Those are the topics you want to stay away from. And Ratio Christi is the only group I can think of that is really having regular discussions on these kinds of topics. So I think that's absolutely crucial. Once you can no longer discuss it, people think, that's a sensitive topic, avoid the topic. No, when you avoid sensitive topics, then people don't learn how to discuss sensitive topics, and then they flip out whenever anyone brings up a sensitive topic. If people get used to discussing sensitive topics, then you actually, here are my reasons for thinking this way, here are my reasons for thinking that way, and no one gets upset, no one kills each other. So, very important organization, and I'm glad they picked this, right? They wanted ISIS, so that's and I'm fine with it. I get to go home if there's any problems. They're the ones who are here. So, any ISIS fans here, by the way? Wonder, you always have to check. I wanted to say a few words before we actually start looking through this, because it ties into the the importance of having discussions on this. Wanted to say a few words about how I became interested in this topic. And basically, my best friend in college was a Muslim named Nabil, and we were friends 2001. That's when we became friends. So 2001, what happens in 2001? September 11th attacks, and I'm best friends with Muslim on campus after the 9/11 attacks. And Nabil and I were both sort of open to any topics the other wanted to bring up. So it was don't bring that up, that's offending me. We could say whatever we wanted around each other, and we might yell and so on. But at the end of the day, we understood, hey, you're not saying that just because you hate me. You're saying it because we're best friends and you think I'm wrong and you think it's important that I would know this. Whereas for lots of people, if you bring up that and you say that about my beliefs or something like that, it must be because you hate me. If you're best friends with someone, that's not true. And so I think that the best way to communicate difficult topics like this is if you're actually friends with someone. That way you can sort of sustain your relationship through those difficult issues instead of never talking to each other again. Because you didn't have that kind of friendship. And so Nabil and I are friends during the 9/11 attacks, following the 9/11 attacks, and so on. And Nabil is from the most peaceful sect of Islam. They condemned the terrorist attacks. Nabil didn't support terrorism. But at the same time, I did notice Nabil was able to see something amusing in terrorist attacks that most other people didn't see. And it was sort of subtle. I would be over at his house, and Nabil would say, "Hey, my cousin just sent me a picture. Check this out." Right? So here's a picture that his cousins were passing around. All of his cousins from the same peaceful sect of Islam. And it says New York City, 2006. So this is 2001. And the postcard is supposedly a postcard from 5 years in the future.
Oh.
And if you see, someone photoshopped a bunch of mosques into New York City. So the idea was that the 9/11 attacks had cleared the ground for the construction of mosques. Now, most of us would not think that this is funny. Nabil thought that he actually, hey, this is amusing. He presented this to me as something that would be funny. And I challenged him on it. Why do you think that's funny? He said, well, are we the only people who deal with tragedy through humor? I said, well, no, but this is kind of a different way of dealing with it through humor. And anyway, then he showed me the next one, and this one. And then there was this one. This one was actually funny. So I was interested because Nabil and I were best friends all the way through college, and we started off the first few years focusing mainly on Christian topics. When we discussed, jihad or something like that, it was quick, something about a terrorist attack or something like this, and we talked about it a little bit. But mainly, for the first few years, we were talking about the reliability of the New Testament, Jesus' death and resurrection, the deity of Christ, the Trinity, things like that. And it was after we'd been friends for a few years when I said, look, as critically as we're looking at these issues, why don't we look at Islam with that same level of criticism and skepticism and see how it stands up? So we started looking at Islam. And a while later, Nabil eventually, of course, became a Christian. Here's his baptism. And that's me in the background thinking, cool, I'm done with Islam. Because I had no interest in studying Islam other than that my best friend was a Muslim if he had been a Buddhist, I would have been studying Buddhism. Right? So I was studying Islam just because my best friend was a Muslim, and now in case you're saying, oh, David Wood's a hate monger, he started it. He came at me first. I was just defending myself. Nabil eventually became a Christian, and that was the only reason I was studying Islam. So I thought, cool, I'm done. There were other topics I was more interested in than Islam. But I never quite got away because right after Nabil became a Christian, I think it was about a month before he got his first death threat attached to his car. And that was weird because he wasn't even, announcing publicly. He'd only told a few people that he was a Christian. And then after several months, Muslims started challenging us to debate, which, apart from having a good friend with different opposing views to have a discussion with, public debate would be my second favorite way of having those kinds of discussions. Because it's easy for me to stand here. I can say whatever I wanted if there's no one to oppose me. If you have someone like Shabir Ali on the other side of the stage, anything you say is good. If you say something wrong, if you get something wrong, it's gonna get blasted out of there. And so it forces you to study very carefully and to present information very carefully. And by the way, the presentation I'm going to go through, I kept it the same presentation that I gave in my debate with Shabir Ali on whether the Quran is a book of peace, so you can see if what I'm saying here stands up to scrutiny. You can watch the debate. So people started challenging both of us to debate, and there are lots of Muslims who don't like it when someone leaves Islam, but they're concerned that other people are going to look at Nabil and say, well, he's leaving Islam. Maybe there's all this evidence against Islam, so maybe I need to look at this too and leave Islam as well. So there were Muslim debaters out there who wanted to show that Nabil was an idiot, but they also wanted to show that I was an idiot, so they wanted me on stage too. So Nabil was dumb, and he was dumb for listening to me, and I'm dumb, and therefore, don't follow anything we're saying. And so we ended up debating, and still for a few years we're going around, we're doing debates, and I'm still thinking, very soon I'm going to get away from this. I'm going to get away from this Islam topic and get to things I would rather be studying than, 7th century book of Muhammad. I'm just not that interested in it. And then things happen like ISIS comes out, and now I'm just stuck. Just stuck dealing with Islam because there's too much misinformation out there that needs to be corrected, and not enough people correcting it. So have to keep rolling with this. Now we're gonna go through what Islam teaches about, mainly about jihad, so we can see how it relates to things that are going on in the world. But I should probably, since I don't know how much familiarity everyone has, I'll start from the beginning by just defining some basic terms. So, basic terms, I can't think of any terms I'll be using. Well, if I use other terms tonight, I'll define those as I go along. But some basic key terms here when we're talking about Islam. Allah, just the Arabic word for God. Islam. Islam is an Arabic word that means submission. In its theological or religious context, it refers to submission to Allah. Muslim is one who submits, so it's related to the word Islam, but Muslim is the person and Islam is the religion. Muhammad, Muslims believe that he is the last prophet, the seal of the prophets. Muslims believe in many other prophets. They believe in many of the biblical prophets. There are about 25 prophets named in the Quran, and Muhammad is the last of them. The Quran, the word, this is a Quran. This is a Quran with parallel Arabic and English and notes. So the Quran is actually not that long. It's shorter than the New Testament. But the word Quran means recitation, and it's believed. The beliefs about the Quran are fairly different from what Christians believe about the Bible. The Quran is believed to be Allah's eternal word. So the Quran was eternal with Allah forever. It was eventually revealed to Muhammad, but Muhammad and no other human beings had any input into the Quran. It was just revealed to human beings. But the Quran also says that you have to listen to the teachings and decisions of Muhammad, and that Muhammad is the pattern of conduct for Muslims. You don't have that in the Quran. You have that in other sources, which are called the Hadith, which record the teachings and example of Muhammad. So Muslims, well, there are occasionally Muslims who are Quran-only Muslims. They only believe in the authority of the Quran. They're regarded as heretics by other Muslims because the Quran says you have to obey Muhammad and follow his pattern of conduct and so on. So you need the other information about Muhammad in order to do that. And so you submit to Allah by obeying the Quran, and since the Quran tells you to follow Muhammad, also the Hadith. Now, what does that entail? Well, fortunately, we have some lists. They've been condensed. They were condensed during the time of Muhammad. Some lists of the basics. So you have the basic beliefs that are required, the basic practices. The basic practices that Muslims have to follow are called the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the Shahada, that's the testimony, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Saying this is how you become a Muslim. Salat, these are the 5 daily prayers. Zakat, that's giving alms. Saum, that's fasting, that's associated with the month of Ramadan. And the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, where Muslims travel to the Kaaba and walk circles around the Kaaba and so on. So these are the essential practices of being a Muslim. Then you have the basic required beliefs, and that's belief in the Islamic view of Allah, the angels, the books. Notice it's plural. This is also, or the Quran refers to other books, such as the Torah and the Gospel and so on. Prophets, the Day of Judgment, and predestination, the decree of Allah. Now, so far, this is sort of like almost any other religion out there, in that you have a set of beliefs and practices, and if you follow these practices and you believe these things, then that's how you are a part of this religion. So why is it different? Well, Muhammad talked quite a bit about fighting over these things. And what do I mean? Well, this is chapter 9, verse 29 of the Quran. Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day. Notice, belief in Allah, belief in the last day, the day of judgment, were two of the 6 articles of faith, things you're required to believe. And here Muhammad says, fight those who do not believe these things, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, from among the people of the book is a title for Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So the jizya is a kind of tribute money you pay to the Muslim ruler. Now, notice, this is not fight people who attack you or something like this. Fight people who do not believe in certain things, and those things are on the list of the 6 articles of faith. Muhammad said, this is a quotation from Muhammad in Sahih Muslim, the Messenger of Allah said, I have been commanded to fight against people till they testify that there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the Messenger of Allah, and they establish prayer and pay zakat, and if they do it, their blood and property are guaranteed protection on my behalf, except when justified by law, and their affairs rest with Allah. Now, I have been commanded to fight against people till they testify, that's the Shahada, no God but Allah, Muhammad is his messenger, establish prayer, that's the Salat, and pay zakat. So there he says he's commanded to fight over, and then he mentions 3 of the 5 pillars of Islam. So you're fighting over the articles of faith, you're fighting over the 5 pillars, and so this adds an extra dimension to the teachings. Again, any religion is going to have its practices and core beliefs. But if you add this additional dimension, you have to fight over them, you're going to get a different kind of religion. Now, that's what you would think if you're looking at these, but there are plenty of people, Muslim and non-Muslim, who would say, no, it doesn't work like that. It can't work like that. There are tons of peaceful Muslims out there. Again, Nabil, yeah, he sent a picture that was, sort of mean about New York City, but other than that, Nabil, I was much meaner than Nabil. I would have been much quicker to hit someone in some situation or something like that than Nabil was. So, and there are people who think, if there's a peaceful Muslim, he's just pretending to be peaceful. No, not like that. Nabil, it's not like after he became a Christian, he said, by the way, I was planning to kill you. It wasn't. He had no intentions of ever hurting anyone. And so the idea is, if this were really part of Islam, why would you have lots of peaceful Muslims? You also have peaceful verses in the Quran. The Quran says there's no compulsion in religion. There are peaceful teachings in the Hadiths. There are good, positive teachings about Jews and Christians in the Muslim sources. And so, yeah, this might look like it's fighting, but there has to be more to it than this. There has to be more to it than this. And if some group like ISIS or the Taliban or Boko Haram concludes that they have to go out and violently subjugate people, they must be just focusing on passages like this and ignoring the wider context of what the Muslim sources actually say. And so that would be the attitude of some. We're going to back all the way up to submission and go through this step by step to show that there is a very clear path for groups like ISIS who don't want to reinterpret what Allah says, and who take it very seriously. There's a very clear path between basic Islamic teachings and fighting, or jihad. So let's go back to submission. So this is the Quran, chapter 33, verse 36. It is not fitting for a believer, man or woman, when a matter has been decided by Allah and His Messenger, to have any option about their decision. If anyone disobeys Allah and His Messenger, he is indeed on a clearly wrong path. So as far as submitting, once Allah and His Messenger have said something, it's not fitting for a believer to have any option about that decision. So the requirement here for being a believer is obedience. If you are really submitted, then you have to obey. You have no other option other than obeying the command. Another verse, chapter 4, verse 65. But know, by your Lord, they can have no faith until they make you, Muhammad, judge in all disputes between them and find in themselves no resistance against your decisions and accept them with full submission. So this is one of the verses that tells you have to go to Muhammad's decisions, which would be found in the Hadith. But notice how high the bar is set here. You have no faith. Muslims have no faith until they make Muhammad judge in all disputes. Not only do they make Muhammad judge in all disputes, they can't have any resistance. It can't be, okay, I'll reluctantly do what you say. You can have no resistance against Muhammad's decisions, and you have to accept them with full submission. So Islam means submission, but what's also required is submission to Muhammad. There's a command to submit to the decisions of Muhammad. So, submission, you submit to Allah and to Muhammad. In theory, according to Islam, submitting to the commands of Allah should be straightforward because, according to the Quran, Allah's commands are perfectly clear. And just to give you an idea of what the Quran says along this, there are many more, I just put some up here. Chapter 11, verse 1. This is a book whose verses have been made firm and free from imperfection, and then they have been expounded in detail. Talking about the Quran here. Chapter 12, verse 1. These are the verses of a clear book. 15:1. These are the verses of the book and of a Quran that makes things clear. 24:46. Certainly we have revealed clear communications. 26:2. These are the verses of the book that makes things clear. 27:1. These are verses of the Quran, a book that makes things clear. 28:2. These are verses of the book that makes things clear. 57:9. He is Allah there. He it is who sends down clear communications upon his servant, that he may bring you forth from utter darkness into light. And the point of bringing these up is when you read these, it sort of makes sense to say, okay, when Allah says something, he really means it. And it's not, well, Allah says this, but let me conclude that he means this other thing. If the Quran is Allah's eternal word, and Allah had all eternity to get his book exactly the way he wanted it, and he tells you over and over again that it's clear, that his commands are clear, then if you read the Quran and you say, well, it says this, but I think it means this, something else, then there are many Muslims who would say, you've just claimed that you're speaking more clearly than Allah. And so there would be a resistance to reinterpretation in several Muslim groups out there. So the Quran claims to be clear, but there's a problem. There's a problem because there are lots of passages in the Quran that sound like they're saying something different from other passages of the Quran. So as a quick example, two commands that are along the same lines. Chapter 8, verse 61, but if they incline to peace, you also incline to it and put your trust in Allah. So talking about your enemies or some other group, if they incline towards peace, they want peace, well, you incline towards peace as well. Well, that makes it sound like peace is the goal. If they want peace, then okay, then that's what we want too. Chapter 47, verse 35, be not weary and faint-hearted, crying for peace when you should be uppermost. Here, it doesn't sound like peace is the goal here. It seems like being uppermost over other groups. And you shouldn't want peace. You should want to be uppermost over them. So, which one are you supposed to do here? Am I supposed to seek peace, or am I supposed to seek to be uppermost? Well, there is, going back to Muhammad, a method of interpretation that's laid down. If you have verses that are telling you different things, there's a straightforward method of interpretation. And that's the doctrine of abrogation, which is laid down in the Quran itself. So, chapter 2, verse 106, whatever communications we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring one better than it or like it. Do you not know that Allah has power over all things? And the historical background of this verse is that the unbelievers were criticizing Muhammad for saying things that contradict other sayings of Allah. And so the response comes down when Allah abrogates some other teaching, he brings something better. So Allah might tell you to do something, but then later on, if he tells you to do something different, then he's giving you something better or something comparable to it. And Allah has power over all things. Allah has power to do that, doesn't he? So the method here that's laid down in the Quran, when you have one verse telling you one thing and another verse telling you something else, is abrogation, which is basically which one came last. You can interpret it situationally sometimes. In other words, if you have two verses and they're telling you two different things to do, which situation are you the situation you're in, which verse does it most closely resemble? And that's the one that would apply. Other than that, it would just be a temporal issue. In other words, if you have two verses that are telling you different things, you go to the other Muslim sources, find out when these verses were revealed, whichever one came earlier was abrogated, whichever one came last, that's the one you're supposed to follow. So notice, this is pretty straightforward. You can have any conflicting commands in the Quran and just say, let's look at the other sources and the dates of these things and figure out which one we're supposed to follow. But when we do that with various teachings about how to interact and deal with unbelievers of various groups, you get a pattern. And the pattern is the same whether you just look at the life of Muhammad, so you can read an early biography about Muhammad, or you go to the Hadith, or you go to the Quran. Wherever you go, you find a pattern. And the pattern goes something like this. So right now I'm just talking about Muhammad. When you lay out Muhammad's life and you see how he acted in various situations, when these verses are being revealed, the pattern you get goes something like this. Stage one. So this is Muhammad for about the first 12 years of his, after he becomes a prophet. He's 40 years old when he receives his first revelation. And for about the next 12 years, he's in Mecca. It's a small minority of the population. And Muhammad's general message, as far as Quran revelations during this time, was live in peace. Yes, you're going to be judged by God, but we're all going to be judged and so on. So just don't kill each other over these things. So stage one, when Muhammad and his followers were only a tiny minority of the population, they were commanded to preach a message of peace and tolerance. And so a Quran verse that was revealed this time, still a popular Quran verse to quote today. If you have a disagreement, with the unbelievers, and you're just not going to agree, then at the end of the discussion you say, to you be your religion and to me be my religion. So if you really have a disagreement and you're not going to get past it, then you say, to you be your religion and to me be my religion. Now, that's pretty peaceful, right? That's how you deal with disagreements that you just can't get past. But during this time, we have some details about what was going on behind closed doors. Even though Muhammad was publicly preaching, to you be your religion and to me be my religion, here's something that was going on behind the scenes. Muhammad had gotten into trouble with his tribe because he was condemning their gods. And we read, this is the History of At-Tabari, volume 6, page 95. Abu Talib, that's Muhammad's uncle, sent for the messenger of Allah, and when he came in, he said, nephew, here are the sheikhs and nobles of your tribe. They have asked for justice against you, that you should desist from reviling their gods, and they will leave you to your God. So stop talking about our gods. We won't have any problem with your God. Uncle, he said, shall I not summon them to something which is better for them than their gods? What do you summon them to, he asked. He replied, I summon them to utter a saying through which the Arabs will submit to them, and they will rule over the non-Arabs. Abu Jahl, that's one of the unbelievers, said from amongst the gathering, what is it, my your father? We will give you it and 10 like it. He answered that you should say there is no deity but Allah. Now notice what happens here, right? So Muhammad is preaching, to you be your religion and to me be my religion. Don't fight over these things. Behind closed doors, he's saying, if you join me and agree that there's no God but Allah, then we will rule over the Arabs and the non-Arabs. Now, why is a guy who's publicly preaching, hey, don't fight over these things, talking about ruling over people? Like this is something that's going to happen if his people will just support him. It's almost like he's saying, if I have an army, I can go and rule over these people. I don't have an army right now. Now, why would Muhammad publicly be preaching, to you be your religion and to me be my religion, behind closed doors, I need an army? Well, we have something along these lines in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 28. Let not the believers take disbelievers for their friends in preference to believers. So don't take disbelievers as your friends in preference to believers. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah. You have no connection to Allah if you choose unbelievers as your friends instead of going with believers. Unless it be that you but guard yourselves against them, taking as it were security. Don't be friends with them as opposed to fellow believers, unless it's to guard yourselves against them. So the exception is, if you're trying to guard yourselves against them, then you can be friends with them. And this verse is where the word taqiyya comes from. This is guarding yourself against them. And we have, this is, just so you don't think I'm reading something into this, we have the commentary of the most respected Islamic commentator of all time, Ibn Kathir, where he explains this verse. The tafsir of Ibn Kathir, commenting on unless you indeed fear a danger from them, meaning except those believers who in some areas or times fear for their safety from the disbelievers. In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship to the disbelievers outwardly, but never inwardly. Show friendship outwardly, but never inwardly. For instance, Al-Bukhari recorded that Abu Darda said, we smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them. Al-Bukhari said that Al-Hasan said, taqiyya is allowed until the day of resurrection. This is all commentary on chapter 3, verse 28. But notice the authorities you have here. One, you have the Quran, that's Allah speaking. You have the greatest Islamic commentator of all time commenting on it. He quotes Al-Hasan and Abu Darda, those are companions of Muhammad, and Bukhari, who's the greatest hadith collector of all time. They're all somewhat on the same page about the meaning of this passage. When you're outnumbered, as Muhammad was in Mecca, then you can be friendly towards the unbelievers outwardly, never inwardly. So, in that situation where Muhammad could not hope to win a confrontation with the unbelievers, he preached a message of tolerance in the sense of we're not going to fight over these things. But that wasn't the end of the revelations, because Muhammad eventually moved and the revelations changed. So stage 2 of Muhammad, of the history of Muhammad. Muhammad leaves Mecca, travels to Medina. He's able to form various alliances. And stage 2, when Muhammad had gained a larger following and had formed alliances with various tribes, but wasn't yet strong enough to subjugate the unbelievers, he was ordered to wage defensive jihad. So Muhammad in Mecca wasn't allowed to fight. The Muslims weren't allowed to fight during that time, not even in self-defense. When they travel to Medina, the revelation becomes, now you can fight in self-defense. If someone does something to you first, someone else starts it, then you can defend yourself. So let's look at the passage here. Chapter 2, by the way, if the Quran is not arranged chronologically, so if you're looking at one passage from Surah 2, and we read one earlier from Surah 109, those are not in order. Surah 109 is earlier than Surah 2. Surah 2, 190 to 193. And fight in the way of Allah with those who fight with you. Notice, fight those who fight with you. So other people are fighting you, so you're allowed to fight them now. This is important because before that they weren't allowed to fight, even if people were fighting them. And do not exceed the limits. Surely Allah does not love those who exceed the limits. And kill them wherever you find them. Some people just quote the kill them wherever you find them, right? You need the context, right? Kill them wherever you find them and drive them out from whence they drove you out. And persecution is severer than slaughter. And do not fight with them at the sacred mosque until they fight with you in it. But if they do fight, then slay them, such is the recompense of the unbelievers. But if they desist, then surely Allah is forgiving, merciful. And fight with them until there is no persecution, and religion should be only for Allah. But if they desist, then there should be no hostility except against the oppressors. So there are lots of commands here to fight, but other people are doing something. Other people did something first. So this is a kind of defensive jihad. You're fighting, but it's to defend yourself against something. And there are lots of Muslims who would say, well, look, the Quran does allow fighting, but it's fighting in self-defense. What's wrong with that? Every nation believes in fighting in self-defense. But that's not the end. Stage 3. When Muhammad and his followers became the most powerful force in Arabia, they were commanded to wage offensive jihad, violently subjugating non-Muslims simply for being non-Muslims. So Muhammad was in Medina, and he was able to defend himself. He was able to teach someone a lesson if they messed with the Muslim community. But he wasn't powerful enough to take over, or to take over Arabia, or to take over a city, or anything. Later, Muhammad was the most powerful force in Arabia, and the revelations changed again. And you have the commands about fighting, but now they're not fight those who fight with you. Now the commands are along the lines of fight people based on what they believe, or fight people who are disagreeing with you. So some examples. Fight those who believe not in Allah. 973, O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites and be unyielding to them. Now, by the way, the strive hard there, jihad means to strive or to struggle. So the word here is jihad. It's wage jihad against unbelievers and hypocrites and be unyielding to them. Notice, not wage jihad against people who are attacking you. Wage jihad against people who are oppressing you, as other commands had already stated. This is fighting unbelievers and hypocrites. 9:123, O you who believe, fight those of the unbelievers who are near to you and let them find in you hardness. 48:29, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are severe against disbelievers and merciful among themselves. Those who are with Muhammad, if you're on Muhammad's side, severe against disbelievers, merciful among themselves, merciful towards fellow Muslims. Now, the response to verses like that, if you know Muslims, you know they're not doing this to you, right? They're not severe against you and only merciful towards their fellow Muslims. So how do you get around passages like this? Well, the standard way is, well, if you just read these in context, you'll see that they don't mean what it sounds like they say, right? So notice, I have a 929, and fight those who believe not in Allah, ... Well, maybe something in the rest of that verse says, if they're attacking you or something like that. Or maybe the verse before it says it, or the verse after it, or the historical context says something about that. And so those are the kinds of things you mean when you talk about read the verse in context. You can be referring to the historical context, what was going on that this verse was about, or the literary context, what does the rest of the passage say? So just as an example, we'll go through the context here of one of these passages. So this is from Ibn Kathir, The Battles of the Prophet. It's a commentary on Surah 9, verse 29. So fight those who do not believe in Allah. This is the historical background. This is what's going on when that verse is revealed. Allah, Most High, ordered the believers to prohibit the disbelievers from entering or coming near the sacred mosque. So after Muhammad took Mecca, the disbelievers, so the pagans, were no longer allowed to take the pilgrimage to Mecca. The pagans used to take the pilgrimage to Mecca. Once Muhammad took over, there was a revelation that they can't come near it anymore. So Allah Most High ordered the believers to prohibit the disbelievers from entering or coming near the sacred mosque. On that, Quraysh, that's Muhammad's tribe, thought that this would reduce their profits from trade. So if you don't allow people to come to your city anymore to take the pilgrimage, you're keeping all these people out of your city. Well, guess what? That brought money into your city. Same as the Hajj today. People come in and they stay someplace and they buy food and they buy things while they're there, and this brings a lot of wealth into the city. So the Quraysh thought that this would reduce their profits from trade. You're not allowing these people to come here anymore. Therefore, Allah Most High compensated them and ordered them to fight the people of the book, Jews and Christians. Notice, Jews and Christians had nothing to do with this. Pagans are no longer allowed here. Well, that's how we were making money. We were making money from the pagans coming here. How are we going to make back that money? Well, Allah is going to tell us to fight the Jews and Christians. So, Allah ordered them to fight the people of the book until they embrace Islam or pay the jizya. You're going to fight them until they embrace Islam. If you embrace Islam, you pay zakat. If you don't, then you pay the jizya. You pay tribute money so that you don't get killed. And then Ibn Kathir quotes Surah 9, verse 28 to 29, and says, and concludes, therefore the Messenger of Allah decided to fight the Romans in order to call them to Islam. So, Muhammad decides to fight the Romans. Why? Because the Romans are attacking? No. It has nothing to do with it. The Romans attacking him, Muhammad fighting them in self-defense, has absolutely nothing to do with the historical context here. The historical context is, we no longer have money coming in from the pagans. Where are we going to make back that money? Allah says, go fight the Jews and the Christians, Surah 9, verse 29. And the conclusion is, therefore the Messenger of Allah decided to go fight the Romans. That's the historical context. Now we have the literary context. What happens when we read the surrounding verses? Well, the passage starts in chapter 9, verse 28. So this is the beginning of the passage. O you who believe, truly the pagans are unclean, so let them not, after this year of theirs, approach the sacred mosque. So the same thing we read in the historical context. Pagans aren't allowed to come to take the pilgrimage anymore. And if you fear poverty, so if you fear poverty because they're not bringing in their money anymore by taking the pilgrimage, soon will Allah enrich you, if He wills, out of His bounty, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. So far, lines up perfectly with the historical context, right? So, you fear poverty because they're not coming to your city anymore. Allah can enrich you. How's Allah going to do that? Well, next verse. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Lines up perfectly with the historical context, doesn't it? We're not having money from the pagans coming here anymore. Where are we going to get our money? Next verse, fight those who do not believe in Allah, specifically Jews and Christians here. Until they pay you the jizya, until they pay you tribute money. Now you have tribute money coming in. What do you need money from the pagans for? Now, maybe there's, again, we have to pay attention to the context. Maybe there's going to be something right after this, but don't fight them until they come and attack you or something like this. Why don't we get the reasons why it's okay to fight Jews and Christians? Well, we do. The Quran, the very next verse, and this would have been a question that came up from Muhammad's followers because they understood dealing with the pagans, but the Jews and Christians were given the title the people of the book. It was considered we had revelations from God. We weren't like the pagans. So, some of Muhammad's followers would have thought to themselves, why are we going to fight Jews and Christians? Well, next verse, chapter 9, verse 30, and the Jews say, Ezra is the son of Allah, and the Christians say, the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. Allah's curse be upon them, how they are turned away. So right after saying, fight them, why are we going to fight them? The next verse is, Christians say Jesus is the Son of God, and Jews say Ezra is the Son of God. By the way, have you ever met a Jew who said that Ezra is the Son of God? No one else has either. It's a very, very odd thing to say. Especially since it's supposedly parallels to the way Christians say that Jesus is the Son of God. So, nothing here about Christians or Jews attacking. Maybe in the next verse. They took their rabbis and their monks to be their lords besides Allah, and Christ the Son of Mary. Yet they were commanded to worship but one God. There is no God but He. Praise and glory to Him. Far is He from having the partners they associate with Him. Notice this is all complaints about our religious beliefs, right? Nothing here so far about what we're doing to Muhammad or his companions. Maybe the next verse. They desire to put out the light of Allah with their mouths. I underline with their mouths. Notice this is about what we're saying, right? They say Jesus is the Son of God. The complaint about something we do here, it's about what we say. When we say what we believe about Jesus. This is the complaint in the passage that calls for our violent subjugation. They desire to put out the light of Allah with their mouths, but Allah will not allow but that his light should be perfected, even though the unbelievers may detest it. And the next verse is the end of the passage. It is he who hath sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to prevail it over all religion, even though the idolaters may detest it. So why does Allah send Muhammad? To prevail it over all religion. Right after talking about beliefs of Jews and beliefs of Christians, complaining about things we say, and ordering to fight us until we pay the jizya and feel ourselves subdued. That's the end of the passage. We just read the entire context. Was there one word about self-defense here? Apart from they're saying certain things and you need to stop them from saying certain things. No. And so the sort of context defense, if you just read Surah 9:29 in context, you would see it's about people who are attacking you. That's not what these passages say. So if you want to claim that these passages aren't talking about fighting and subjugating, you need a better defense than to just say context, because the context shows that the verse means exactly what it says it means. And so what's the response to this? If you're a group like ISIS, it's pretty straightforward. You look around at the world and you're interpreting it through the life of Muhammad. Muhammad's the pattern of conduct, according to Allah. Surah 33, verse 21. Muhammad's the pattern of conduct. When Muhammad was completely outnumbered, peace and tolerance. When Muhammad was able to fight but wasn't able to conquer, then it was defensive jihad. You fight when someone does something to you. You fight in response to other people. When you are able to conquer an area, you conquer an area and establish Islamic law, Sharia. Now, from that perspective, many of history's terrorist groups, so Al-Qaeda, Hamas, groups like that, they regard themselves as fighting defensive jihad. The United States has done this. Israel has done that. Therefore, in response to what has been done to us, we fight them and attack them. So they regard their fighting, their acts of terror, as a response. So they view themselves as fighting defensive jihad. Why? Well, they're not in a position to take over. If you're ISIS a few years ago, and you're looking at certain places in Syria and in Iraq, and you say, we are actually in a position to take this over. According to the pattern of Muhammad, the pattern that Muhammad laid down, what are we supposed to do? Well, now is not the time for defensive jihad anymore. Now is the time for offensive jihad. We go out and fight and take over the area and establish Islamic law. So, notice, I put all this together because there's a very straightforward pathway there of how to get to ISIS-style fighting and subjugating and so on. Religious-based fighting people based on what they believe. If you want to interpret it some other way, this is the perspective of ISIS. If you're someone like ISIS and you say, no, you're not supposed to do that, what that verse really means, what fight those who do not believe in Allah really means, what fight the unbelievers and the hypocrites really means is something else, then you're violating that basic level of submission to Allah. Allah says that you can only submit to Him, you only have true faith in Him if you obey what He says and you obey what Muhammad said. What does Muhammad say? I've been commanded to fight people until they recite the Shahada and establish prayer and pay zakat. Fighting people until they establish basic Islamic practices. What does Allah say? Fight people who do not believe. If you say, I'm going to interpret that in some other way, the tendency from an ISIS perspective is you're claiming to be better than Allah here. You're claiming to speak more clearly than Allah. You're claiming to know better than Muhammad. You say we don't fight people based on their beliefs or practices. And Muhammad said, I've been commanded to fight people until they recite the Shahada and so on. You're claiming to be greater. And that is why they will not hesitate to go and kill people as hypocrites. Right? That's why they will not hesitate to go kill Shias or other groups, anyone they don't regard as embodying true Islamic Orthodox doctrine and practice. And so that's where you get ISIS from. I think I have a couple more minutes, and so before we'll have Q&A. But just a couple more minutes, because there is an important objection here, and that's that the vast majority of Muslims do not do what ISIS does. And so why is that? I should be clear here. If you follow this line of thought through, you have a pretty clear idea of what you're supposed to do with unbelievers in certain situations, namely when you have authority over them, that you can subjugate them in those situations. But there is wiggle room on a lot of other issues, like ISIS does things that you can look through the Muslim sources and say, you shouldn't be doing that. Now the problem is, which often doesn't get brought up, you can look to other passages and say, no, we should be doing this. So for an example, there are only a couple of things where people pointed to ISIS and said, you see, they did this, they're not true Muslims. So they were killing innocents, and the Quran says don't kill innocents, but they've been killing innocents. There's an awful argument. The people that ISIS is killing are not innocent according to their view of Islam. And unbelievers and hypocrites and polytheists and Jews and Christians are not innocent from an Islamic perspective. So they're not fighting people who are truly innocent in an Islamic, according to Islamic theology. Another is, but they kill their fellow Muslims. And you're not allowed to kill fellow Muslims in Islam. Well, that's true. As a general rule, you're not supposed to be killing fellow Muslims. But there are exceptions. You kill apostates, for instance. You can kill hypocrites. You can kill people for committing certain crimes like murder or adultery. So you're allowed to kill them in certain situations. And who are they killing? Are they killing Muslims they regard as good, upstanding Muslims? Or they're killing Muslims that they regard as hypocrites and apostates? We saw verse 973, wage jihad against unbelievers and hypocrites. So that's not a condemnation. That's not a sound condemnation of ISIS. But then you have more specific things, like there was a time when they burned a Jordanian pilot. They burned him alive. And you do have some teachings which are usually interpreted as don't burn people. So Ibn Abbas, that was a relative of Muhammad, he once condemned the Caliph Ali. Caliph Ali was burning people, and Ibn Abbas said, Muhammad said, do not punish with Allah's punishment. And Ibn Abbas interpreted this to mean, well, Allah punishes with fire, therefore you shouldn't punish people by burning them with fire. And Ali said, okay, I'll stop, I won't do that. But you have other passages where Muhammad's closest companion in life, Abu Bakr, burned people. He burned captives, to set an example. And so if you want to say, hey, you can make a case against burning people, you certainly can. If you say you're not a Muslim because you burned someone, that's a different story, because now you've just said that Abu Bakr, to whom Sunnis all trace their theological lineage there, are not Muslims. So you just ruled out 85 to 90% of Muslims as Muslims, because Abu Bakr is not a Muslim because he burned people. So anyway, the point here is the standard arguments that are used to say, here, these guys can't be true Muslims. To people who've been reading the sources, we read and go, actually what you just said he can't be a Muslim for, Muhammad did that here, or Abu Bakr did that here, Ali did that here, and so if they're not real Muslims, what happens to Islam here? But at the end of the day, the real objection here is that so many Muslims just do not interpret it this way. And so the question is, why don't they interpret things this way? Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I came up with what I call the Jihad triangle here. And the idea is just believing in Islam does not make you is not going to make you a terrorist. If you say, hey, I believe in Islam, you convert to Islam tomorrow, and you've decided that you're a Muslim, that is not going to turn you into a terrorist or a jihadi or anything else. You might end up being the most peaceful person in the world. So the idea here is that jihad or terror is not the product of one feature of a person, namely belief in Islam. You can believe in Islam all day, that doesn't make you a terrorist. It's a product of basically three features of a person. So one would be belief. So in other words, you're not going to wage jihad, fighting unbelievers in the name of Allah, unless you believe. So belief is required, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So it's needed, but it doesn't get you to jihad. Something else is needed. One, you have to, two, you have to know what Islam teaches about this. In other words, a lot of what I just said about jihad and about what Muhammad said and about what Allah said and about three different stages, depending on, that are based on Muhammad's life, most Muslims you've known don't know anything about what I just said there. And by the way, that's part of the recruiting tool, right? If you're a devout Muslim, the recruiter, the ISIS recruiter, he approaches you and says, hey, you believe in Islam? Yes, I believe in Islam. Did you know that you're required to wage jihad? No, I'm not required to wage jihad. Well, let me explain it to you then. And then they go through the passages, the kinds of passages that I just went through, and say, you see here, how are you going to get out of this? How are you going to reinterpret this? If you reinterpret it, again, you're saying you're more clear than Allah. And so you have to agree with this interpretation. Therefore, you're required to wage jihad. So, not just believing, but also knowing what Islam teaches about these issues. If you believe in Islam, but you don't know, you haven't really gone through the sources to see what it teaches about these different situations, there are plenty of passages in the Quran where you can look and say, that's a peaceful teaching, that's what I'm commanded. It's commanded by Allah, it's right there in the Quran. Not seeing how all of these things tie together. So you have to understand the context of these various passages and so on. Even that's not enough, because you're always free to reinterpret a perfectly clear command. You shouldn't do that according to what Allah says about the clarity of His word, but nothing's stopping you. Here in the United States, nothing's stopping you from taking any one of these passages and saying, I think it really means something totally different from what it says. So there's a third requirement, and that would be something like obedience. You have to have a certain personality type where once you believe that God has told you something, you're going to do it. And it doesn't matter if you die. And by the way, this isn't just a characteristic, a religious characteristic or a characteristic of Muslims. This is a general human characteristic. Some people are the personality type where once they believe something, you can kill them. They won't stop, right? The civil rights leaders, they understood, hey, we might get killed for this. Some of them were actually killed for them. They were completely willing to die for what they believed in. But once you put that kind of personality trait, namely, hey, once I believe this, I'm ready to die for it. There are lots of people who aren't like that. Yeah, I believe that, but no, I'm not going to die for it. There are other people who, once they believe something, they're ready to go to follow it till the death. Once you attach that to knowing what Islam teaches about various things, and how to deal with unbelievers, and what to do in certain situations, and belief, sincere belief, that those commands are from God and from God's prophet, you put all of that together, that's when I would say you get the jihad triangle. Then you get someone who's going to go out and fight. Now, once you are that kind of person, right? Once you've got a jihadi, you've got someone who believes and knows what he's called to do and is the sort of person who's ready to go to his death for what he believes, then you have a few options of what to do here. So you can, if you're here in the United States, then you might go out and join a foreign terrorist group. And I wrote an article for the Christian Research Journal on people who've gone out to join foreign terrorist groups. Lots of people went out to join. You have the further option there of going out and joining Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Al-Shabaab or the Taliban. There are plenty of people who went out and joined those groups after concluding that they're supposed to wage jihad. But you don't have to. You could wage jihad at home. And here you would have the further option of, what do I do? Bombs, guns, trucks, cars. What do I do? Or you could conclude that you just want to support it financially. I bring this up because they don't get the kind of attention that actual terrorist attacks get, but there are lots of people who get charged with providing support to foreign terrorist organizations, sending them money, sending them supplies, and so on. And that's perfectly acceptable according to Islam. You don't have to go out and fight if you're providing support for those who do. And finally, you could think, I'm not sure what to do. I know that in certain circumstances I might have to wage jihad, but I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do here. I don't know if ISIS is the correct group. I don't know who has it right here. I don't know if I'm supposed to go blow someone up. But if the situation ever arises, where I know that this is clearly an instance of jihad that Muslims are supposed to fight, then I will. But in the meantime, I'm going to wait. So that option there, if you conclude that you're supposed to fight, you might wait patiently for many years until you see someone that you think has it right. And so then you might decide to go out and join ISIS. And that's what people from France and Great Britain and Russia and the United States sort of ran out to join ISIS. And why? Well, ISIS was very good at their online propaganda and sort of recruiting people. What were they doing? What was that entire process? That entire process was taking people who believe they have one side of that triangle and looking for people who have that one side of the triangle, but are also people who are the kinds of people who will obey if they just know what Islam teaches. And convincing these people what you're actually supposed to do is go out and fight. And we're the group who are doing what Allah commands. We're taking over and we're forming a caliphate, as our sources tell us to do. And so that's why you had it. Now that, fortunately, ISIS has been losing a lot of ground, and I really hope that the only times we hear about ISIS in the coming months is to hear that they've lost another city or another town or something like that. And so now if you're looking at it, keep in mind, at the beginning, when we first start hearing about ISIS, it was like victory after victory after victory. And so if you don't know what to do, it looks like, wow, maybe Allah is blessing this group because this group has it right. Now, suffering defeats, hopefully a lot of people don't keep going out and throwing their lives away to fight for ISIS. So just to clarify, I'm not saying that this is the only way to view Islam. To be clear, I've said it over and over again, but to be clear, many Muslims do not interpret Islam this way. The vast majority of Muslims you will meet do not interpret Islam the way that I've laid down here. The point is, if you're asking the question, is ISIS Islamic, or are these guys real Muslims? The pathway is just, Allah means what he says, because he says that we have to submit to him, and he's perfectly clear. He says different things in the Quran in different circumstances. Some are to live in peace, some are to fight defensively, some are to go out and subjugate. How are we supposed to interpret this? Well, the method of interpretation given to us by Allah is abrogation. You follow the final marching orders. What are the final marching orders? Fight unbelievers, fight hypocrites, make them pay you the jizya. What does ISIS do? Exactly that, to the letter as far as I can tell, as far as what the Quran says. And so, are they Muslims? Is that the only interpretation of Islam? No. Is that a very viable interpretation of Islam? I would say yes. So the question is, are these guys Muslims? I would say, according to the Quran and the Hadith, absolutely. So, should we do some Q&A? Or you don't want to leave now, by the way, because it's like bad weather out there.
Let's thank David Wood for coming all the way down here from New York. So Dr. Wood is right. We are going to enter into a Q&A right now. It's going to be really simple. We have Aaron, the light, bright young buck, who's going to run up and down the stairs with the mic to bring those to those who have questions. Just a few ground rules. One question. The mic really isn't a podium for a lecture. So let's try to keep it to questions, not necessarily statements. And you just ask your question. And if you're in the middle of the row and you have to pass it down to get it to you, just ask your question and pass it back to them. So Aaron will begin to wander around and find those who have questions. So if you could just raise your hand and flag him down, and he'll come to you.
Why do Muslims hate Jews so much?
You can say, why do some Muslims hate Jews so much? I know Muslims who don't have that much of a problem with Jews. But for those who do, it is pretty well grounded in the Muslim sources. Surah 5, Allah says that you will not find anyone as hostile to the believers as the pagans and the Jews, the idolaters and the Jews. So it's built into the Quran that Jews are the sort of ongoing enemies of the Muslims. And Muhammad said that the end will not come until Muslims fight the Jews to the point where trees and stones will cry out, hey, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him. This was a couple of years ago, there was this interesting thing where Hollywood put out this, like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, everyone signed this document condemning the charter of Hamas for saying that the time will come when Muslims will fight the Jews until the trees and stones are crying out, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him. They all signed this thing saying, we condemn this teaching of Hamas. It's from Muhammad, it's a quotation from Muhammad. And so the idea that why does Hamas get that idea? Hamas gets that idea from Muhammad, right? And things are amplified when you have the restoration of the nation of Israel, because now it's not just, hey, here are some of our enemies historically, and during the time of Muhammad, these were our enemies. Now it's, and we're putting a big chunk of them right in the middle of it, and right in the middle of the Middle East, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so what that does is it sort of, oh, yes, these guys are our perpetual enemies. And so it's sort of those two things, the historical dimension of the nation of Israel, but that's tied into things that both Allah and Muhammad have said about Jews.
According to your logic, an obedient Muslim is a terrorist. So would you say that a disobedient Muslim is peaceful?
To be clear, I believe you can follow the Muslim sources completely and be a peaceful Muslim. And what I mean by that is, I believe you could be a Muslim in the United States. Know everything I just said. Be aware of everything the Muslim sources say. And say, well, I'm in the situation that Muhammad was in when he was in Mecca and he was outnumbered. And his message there was, to you be your religion and to me be my religion. And so I think you could be a Muslim and understand everything I just said and conclude, well, therefore I'm supposed to live in peace with those around me. Because that's what Muhammad did when he was in Mecca. Now the danger there is, if you're ever not in that situation, and you understand what I just said, you understand in a different situation you would be called to fight. But no, I'm not saying that if you're a peaceful Muslim, you're disobedient. You might just not know, right? So there are all kinds of situations that arise because there are a number of factors here. In other words, I know Muslims who are very obedient Muslims who aren't waging jihad. Jihad is one thing that the Muslim sources teach. And so what I would say is, if you interpret the Muslim sources in the way that I would interpret them if I were a Muslim. In other words, if I were a Muslim, I would be interpreting the sources kind of along the same way as a lot of the terrorist groups do. Because I'm the kind of person who says, okay, you said this, and you've said that it's clear, and you've said that I'm not allowed to disobey it in any way, therefore I would have to do exactly what you say there, or I would be disobedient. Other Muslims think there's a way around that you can interpret these things and so on, and so there's a methodology involved here, and different personality types. So again, all I'm really saying is that there is a straightforward path, right? These guys are not nutcases. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, is not just, oh, I'm a guy who really wants to fight and kill people, therefore I'm going to use Islam as a tool to go out and fight and kill people. You could be a very nice person and read the sources and conclude exactly what I've concluded. No, this is really telling me to fight. But I'm not going to speak for all Muslims if they see things differently on as far as interpretation goes.
So here in the United States, where Islam is not the dominant religion, if you had a Muslim who satisfied all three sides of the triangle, how would they justify offensive jihad? Because they're not in a position of dominance. So wouldn't they go with the defensive jihad?
Yeah, if you did something here, right? The alternative would be if you wanted to wage offensive jihad, then you would say, I'm going to a place where offensive jihad is being waged, a place where you have a caliphate that is taking over territory. And so you would go join a foreign terrorist group like ISIS or go with the Taliban or something like that. But generally your options, if you're here, from the perspective of the life of Muhammad. Now keep in mind, this can, when I say that people might not know this, they might also not know that there's this pattern. They might think that, the same fighting rule applies wherever you are. And it's all the same, right? So you can not know what Islam teaches and get it wrong in the opposite direction where you're just going out and fighting and killing everyone or something like that. But if you're in the United States and you didn't travel abroad, the general options open to you would be fight defensive jihad, in which case you'd be saying the United States did this, and the United States supports Israel, and the United States did that, and therefore I'm going to fight them. Or it would be, no, I'm commanded to live in peace in this situation because Muhammad did. If the situation changes, then what I do will change, but for now I'm going to live in peace. Or you can support financially or something like that. You can send money to someone in lands where they are fighting or something like that.
How do we rectify Christian groups that commit acts of terrorism because of their interpretation of the Bible?
Like what?
So that like the abortion clinic bombers and people that commit, in the name of God because they feel like their interpretation of the Bible would be something more along like Old Testament lines.
Yeah, the abortion clinic bombers that have been pointed out to me, I've never been too convinced that they were that they were very devout Christians. One of them said he prefers Nietzsche to. He said, I prefer Nietzsche to the Bible. He said they went to them and said, hey, what do you think? So we're getting this from the Bible. I prefer Nietzsche to the Bible. So it didn't seem like devout, but you can say this, right? What if a Christian does that, right? So and maybe some of them are doing it because they really believe you can't kill babies, and therefore I'm going to kill you if you kill babies. So I would point out several things. If we're talking about, this is a comparison to something like ISIS. A couple things I would point out is, notice when I talked about ISIS, where do I start? I started, what does the Quran say? What does the Quran say that Islam is? How are you supposed to interpret it? If that's how you're supposed to interpret it, what are the commands? What are the final marching orders? Is ISIS doing this? Build a foundation of what the religion commands, and then see, is this group following it, rather than saying, here's what a group is doing, and are they following it? If you did the same thing, so notice you had peaceful teachings in the Quran, the final marching orders, the takeaway message. In other words, if you read the whole Quran and read the historical context and everything, and you said, what are the final marching orders? The final marching orders are, fight those who do not believe in Allah. If you apply that same methodology to the Bible, you read the entire Bible, what are the final marching orders? Not what was Joshua commanded, what are the final marching orders? What's the takeaway message? The takeaway message is not cross the river Jordan and fight the Canaanites. The final marching orders are love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, live in peace with everyone. These are the final marching orders for Christians. So if you're reading that and concluding, I need to go blow people up, that could, in a sense, be motivated by a Christian teaching, namely that life is precious and that you shouldn't be having a clinic where you're killing babies and stuff like that, right? So they could be motivated by that, but as far as some sort of command. Hey, you have to go out and kill these people. You don't have that kind of clear command. Whereas in the case of Islam, you do have the clear commands about fighting and so on. So that would be one thing. Another thing I would point out as far as the difference here. Notice that the way ISIS interprets how they're supposed to deal with unbelievers and hypocrites, very similar to the way the Taliban in Pakistan and Afghanistan conclude that they should deal with unbelievers and hypocrites. Very similar to the way Boko Haram in Nigeria believes that they should deal with unbelievers and hypocrites. Culturally, these are completely different areas of the world. Pakistan is completely different culturally, historically, from Arabia and Iraq, Persia, which is completely different culturally, historically, from Nigeria, and yet people in all of these areas are concluding the same thing about how they're supposed to go and interact with unbelievers and so on. Now, what you can conclude is there's some common thread here. What's the common thread tying together Boko Haram and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and all these different groups spread across all these areas? Why is this, even though it's a minority in Islam, it's still enough to say, why is there this connection between groups that speak different languages, are culturally very different, ethnically very different? They come to the same conclusions. We should ask, why is there this common thread? What ties this all together? Well, what ties it together is that's what Muhammad and Allah said about those situations. Why don't you see that same thing with abortion clinic bombers? In other words, why don't we see abortion clinic bombers? Because there are abortion clinics all over the place, right? Why don't we see abortion clinic, Christians coming out of church and blowing up an abortion clinic in New York, and Christians coming up and blowing up abortion clinics in California, and Christians going out of church and blowing up abortion clinics in France and Great Britain? It's a very, very rare phenomenon. And it's similar with, the other group that gets brought up is, you have the KKK and you have Westboro Baptist Church. Those are the examples, right? But notice the same reason would apply, right? If so you've got Westboro Baptist Church, right, protesting soldiers' funerals, and they believe that that's what they're supposed to do. If this were really tied, there were really a direct connection between their religious beliefs and their actions, wouldn't you see, the same thing in Great Britain and something similar in, Christian areas of Africa and Christian areas of the Middle East and Christian areas? Wouldn't you see something similar popping up? The same thing with the KKK. If you really had this connection between racism and Christian doctrine, wouldn't you see these groups springing up in different areas? And so when you don't have that connection, I would say you should be suspicious. If a religion actually if there is a straightforward, logical means of saying, here's how I got to this action based on the teachings, then you should see that thing pop up over and over again. You don't see it with abortion clinic bombers and so on. And the other is, you should be able to state what the pathway is, right? Notice I emphasize over and over again, this is the pathway. From here to here, A to B to C to D to E and so on. You should be able to say, as an abortion clinic bomber, you could get the first step or two. I believe it's wrong to kill babies. You could defend them. How do you get to it? And therefore I blow up abortion clinics. Well, there's a whole lot of commands that would conflict with that you have to now explain away. And the things that you have to explain away just happen to be the final marching orders for Christians. And so, in order to say, hey, we're going out and killing in the name of Jesus, when Jesus repeatedly condemned killing for him, you have a long, very, very confusing route to go. I mean, think about it. If there was ever a time to kill for Jesus, it would have been, in that garden, right? And that's what Peter did. Yeah. There's a time to kill for Jesus. It's now. I'm pulling out the sword. What? Jesus say, "Who lives by the sword will die by the sword." Put your sword back in its place. And so, I mean, if you have to say, if there was ever a time to fight in Jesus' name, it was right there. He condemned the guy who did it. Then not up to us to be. And again, I'm not saying this from from the perspective of a pacifist. The Bible also says that there are nations and governments, and they have authority, and so this is their job. As far as going out and saying, I'm a Christian, therefore I'm going to fight or kill you for Jesus, that's a different situation. Anyway, if you need to get around that, you've got some very creative exegesis to do.
I guess sort of piggybacking off of that a little bit. At least publicly, the Christian influence is decreasing in America. Whether or not that's true is debatable. But would you say that that decrease is allowing fertile ground for the rise of more Islamic practices in more of the straightforward sense of the word?
So is the sort of decline of Christianity leading to the rise of Islam in certain areas?
Is it helping set the ground for that?
It's interesting because Richard Dawkins said this. Richard Dawkins was asked about the decline of Christianity in Europe. And, isn't this a great thing? And Dawkins said, I have mixed feelings about the decline of Christianity in Europe because I think it may have been a bulwark against something worse. And he was clearly talking about Islam there. I think that as much as I dislike Christianity, I dislike it less than I dislike Islam. And Christians and Muslims were there for centuries, and Islam didn't take over. And as soon as Christianity started declining, Islam started, maybe this was protecting us from something worse. And it's interesting. There are atheists who are seeing that the sort of over the past several decades, you've had this secularization. And the secularization of society, it's normally achieved by beating down the religious influence. This is stupid, this is dumb, blah, blah, blah. But there are people who, by nature, aren't buying the secular project, right? But if they grow up and they think, wow, Christianity is really dumb, but they're looking for something more than the naturalist offers them, right? The natural world is all that exists and so on. They know, no, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't really make sense. The universe looks like it has a creator. The universe looks like this. The universe looks like that. And when I say that torturing old ladies for fun is wrong, I mean something more than I just don't like it, right? I mean that it's actually wrong. How does this make sense if we're just molecules in motion or something like that? So they're looking for something transcendent. And if you've rejected Christianity and you're looking for an alternative, and every day after every terrorist attack, you're told what a wonderful religion of peace Islam is. That's one of the options for you. Like in other words, people are not thinking, hey, let me go look up Shintoism. Right? It's not a live. What the philosopher William James would have called live options. There are live options for us, and there are dead options. This doesn't mean they're true or false, but a live option is something at this time you still treat as if you could believe in it, right? It's worthy of consideration. And so if Christianity is done, but secularism isn't enough, guess what? Those were the two main options in the West. And so you're looking for a third. What sort of third in line? Well, Islam. And so that's when you might go to the local mosque and say, hey, what does Islam teach? Well, Islam teaches that God created the worlds, and you need to submit to Him. You believe that, don't you? Yeah, I do believe that. Well, Islam is a religion where you submit to God. How many people believe you should submit to God? I do. Okay. Well, Islam means submission to God, so you should all become Muslims. Right? You know what that is? See, that's very easy, right? And if you're not going through and saying, is this really a revelation from God? Very easy to make that move. But yes, and since this is a Ratio Christi group, I'll go ahead and point this out. Because this is related to apologetics. During the early centuries of Christianity, apologetics is built into the Christian message. Right? You read the early preaching in the book of Acts. It's he's dead. That was a public event, public record. Jesus was crucified. And he rose from the dead. We're all the witnesses. You can torture us and kill us. We're not backing off that claim. What do they provide? They're saying, here's eyewitness. Here's a bunch of eyewitness testimony. The public eyewitness testimony of his crucifixion and 500 witnesses of him alive afterwards. We're all the witnesses. So they're appealing to evidence. And in the early centuries of Christianity, apologetics is built into it. Giving a defense of the message is built into it. Why? No one's going to convert to this unless you have a really good reason to think that it's true. Hey, here's this religion, and if you believe it and you don't back down, I'm going to throw you into those lions over there. Become a Christian, it's a great lion. No, what are you talking about, right? What set Christianity apart is, oh, and by the way, here's how we know that it's true. So in the early centuries, Christianity has an intellectual foundation. They're saying, here's how we can know this is true. Guess what? None of the rest of you have this. Right? You polytheists and you Greeks and you Romans, none of you, every one of you who believes the stuff you believe it because you were taught it. We believe it based on this evidence here that we can confirm. That happens in atmospheres where you're being attacked. Right? Eventually, Christianity dominates Europe, dominates America. Christianity is and you go your whole life, everyone you see is one sort of Christian or another. In that situation, guess what? You no longer have to defend Christianity. You might have to defend your denomination or something of Christianity as opposed to some other denomination. But no one's bothering to defend the resurrection or the existence of God. You don't need anyone who doesn't believe in God. You don't need anyone who doesn't believe in the resurrection. And so, what that does is that removes the need for apologetics. And so, now it's no longer built into the system. Now you don't learn from the time you convert or in church how to proclaim your faith or why you believe. And so when someone challenges you on it, wow, I just believe because that's what I was raised to believe, just like the polytheists and the idolaters and everyone else. And so you're never given that foundation. And what that does is when you're challenged, you realize, whoa, I have no good reason to believe this. Now, here's the thing. Just because you don't have a good reason doesn't mean there isn't a good reason. So the question should be, where do I find out if there's a good reason? And among Christians who leave Christianity over and over again, I see this thing where so I went to my pastor and I asked him, why do I believe this? Well, guess what? That pastor was never taught apologetics either. Right? He grew up believing in Christianity. So you never get to any sort of foundation. People look at that and say, no one has any idea why they believe this. And so I'm leaving this. And then the Muslim preacher comes along and says, hey, we know why we believe in Islam. It's because, Muhammad was a champion of women's rights and the Quran is a scientific masterpiece. The Quran's been perfectly preserved since day one, not a single difference in any manuscript. It's all nonsense, by the way. But that's what's presented. People, they're giving reasons. This must be the truth. And I've heard that over and over and over again. People are leaving Christianity, becoming Muslims because they're not buying secularism. So Islam is sort of filling that need. So that's a rough situation. But the flip side is, now that Christianity is in the position of being attacked from all sides, now you've got a need for apologetics again. And now I think people are going to start examining why they believe what they believe. And once they do that, then, well, I think we'll be fine.
I just had a obvious question. The Quran, is there an authoritative interpreted version? Because I have a Quran, and it's a little bit more flowery than what I saw there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it reads more like a book, and it doesn't sound very harsh to me, and I don't know.
Well, there are. I think I was quoting most of the time up here. I think that was either Yusuf Ali or Hilali Khan. So Yusuf Ali is the most popular Quran translation in the West. Hilali Khan translation is the sort of official version of Saudi Arabia. This is by Salafis, by the way. And the reason I carry this is because Salafis tend not to water things down. So when you hear about Muslim Brotherhood and stuff like that, these are groups who don't want to water things down. If you're asking about Quran, no, there's no official Quran translation to read. It's sort of like Bible translations in the sense that which one you would read depends on kind of what you're looking for. If you want something that goes to Saudi Orthodox Salafi Islamic scholars, that would be the Hilali Khan. If you want sort of the most popular translation in English, because if you're quoting it to someone, you don't want them saying, I don't like that translation, go with the most popular. That would be Yusuf Ali. As far as how easy it is to read, I like the M.H. Shakir version. I think that's the easiest to read of the most popular ones. But even more so than that, there's the Oxford. There's if you look up Oxford Quran, I forget who translated it. It's a Muslim translator. But it's just a common paperback Quran that's put out by Oxford University Press. Certain things are definitely watered down, and he explains his method of interpretation at the beginning. But he's a good writer in English and understands Arabic, and so you end up with a very easy to read text. So if you want to, and I'm saying this because the Quran is very, very difficult to read. I pointed out it's not arranged chronologically, so it's disorganized. Right? Because when they set out, they basically arranged it from the longest chapters to the shortest chapters, even though these were revealed in completely different times and so on. And for the most part, they're reversed. The shorter chapters, which are at the end, are among the first revelations that come to Muhammad. And so chronologically, it's very difficult. They tossed a bunch of passages together in chapters. Sometimes it just goes from one topic to another with no apparent reason whatsoever. Very, very difficult. To give you an example, Anthony Flew is one of the great skeptics of the 20th century. So he's he's with Bertrand Russell, and so these guys were the Richard Dawkins before someone as angry as Richard Dawkins came, right? As far as if you were an atheist, you wanted to read someone, you'd read Bertrand Russell or Anthony Flew or something. Flew eventually became a theist shortly before he died. But when he became a theist, he was asked, do you think you'll ever become something more specific, like a Christian or a Muslim or something like that? He said, no, I just believe, some sort of creator or something like that. But I don't think I'm going to become a Christian or a Muslim or something like that. He was asked why not. And he started drawing comparisons between Christianity and Islam. And it's interesting because he had thoroughly studied both Christianity and Islam. So it was interesting to see the comparisons that he's made after a lifetime of criticizing religion. And he said, well, I'll say three things. One, Jesus was an immensely charismatic figure. The prophet of Islam was not, right? He said, the Bible is I should do the Paul one first. He said, the Apostle Paul had a first-rate philosophical mind. He was a brilliant scholar, spoke multiple languages and so on. Muhammad was basically a 7th century caravan trader, right? So these are his comparisons, not mine, although I agree with them. And finally, he said, regardless of your views, the Bible is an amazing work of literature. To read the Quran is to do penance. If you're non-Catholic, penance is where you punish yourself for your sins. And so it's interesting to see him draw these distinctions because he's not on any particular side here. He's just this is what I've concluded after all these years. So and by the way, I'm not saying the Quran is this difficult, very, very troublesome to read book just because I disagree with it. Most of what I read is stuff I disagree with. And other Muslim sources I think are very interesting. I think many volumes of hadiths are interesting. I think that some of the biographies about Muhammad are very interesting. But the Quran is just really tough to read. So I would say figure out what you're looking for. If you want something that's sort of the easiest to read, I would go on Amazon, type in Oxford Quran, and that's probably the easiest to read. Some of the stuff's going to be watered down a little bit, but it will give you the gist of it's going to be the easiest to read and not give up after 2 chapters or something like that. And again, if you want something that's popular, Yusuf Ali. If you want, Salafi, that's Halil Khan. So. Yep.
I had a question specifically about treatment of females in this particular religion and how ISIS sees the role of women. If you could maybe highlight where their belief system comes from, whether it's the Quran or the Hadiths or Muhammad.
Yeah, are you talking about like sex captives and so on?
Whatever. Just
Yeah. Well, I mean, the women in ISIS seem pretty brutal as well, right? And in a lot of the areas that the female members of ISIS are in control of the female captives and so on, and are in charge of keeping them in line. So as far as the treatment of women in Islam and the how ISIS does things, well, I mean, the Quran says that obedient men and obedient women will be given their reward in paradise and so on. And so there is a role for women in Islam, and ISIS would accept that. As far as how ISIS members treat their wives, I know there are situations where women have been beaten and so on, because you find these, the converts, girls and so on from other countries who went because they thought it was cool to join ISIS, and then they find out how women are getting treated there. It doesn't sound very great, but the most common thing we hear about ISIS treatment of women involves the treatment of captives. Now, as far as taking women and locking them in a house and having a kind of where fighters go in and have sex with these women, and the women, having sex dozens of times a day with various fighters, I don't see that in the Muslim sources. I don't see anything that would condemn it. You do have sex. You're allowed in Islam to have sex with your captives. And you have multiple passages in the Quran about if you capture a woman after a battle and so on, then you're allowed to have sex with her. You don't have to marry her. You can have sex. You can just have sex with her and then sell her in the next town. Now, and I'm pointing that out because historically, in certain areas, if one group fights another group, especially if you're talking about an area like Arabia or something like that, if your town fights another town and the men in your town get wiped out and you're a woman who's left over, you're going to die. You're going to die out there, right? And so in certain situations, it might be in the best interest for your preservation to be absorbed by this other culture, to marry someone, even if they were your conquerors or something like that, even if they were the ones who killed your husband and your father or something like this. It may be in your best interest in terms of your survival if you end up marrying someone else. It may help you actually survive. So there are situations like that. And that's why I'm saying that for the early Muslim, they did do that. There were situations where they did that. They would fight, and there would be women left over, and sometimes they would marry them. But that wasn't required in order to have sex with them. You can have sex with them and then sell them at the next town. So Muslims knew that, and there's an interesting verse, and I say it because the verse isn't clear if you just read what it says. It's Surah 4, verse 24. Surah 4, verse 24 of the Quran says, "Also forbidden to you are married women, except those whom your right hands possess." Now, if you read that, you wouldn't be sure what it's talking about. Is it talking about forbidden for marriage? Am I not allowed to marry married women? What is that talking about? And we have, so that's a verse where it's open to multiple interpretations. It's by going to the historical context where you find out what question this verse was answering, that you find out what it was actually saying. The Muslims went into a battle, and they already knew that they were allowed, after they've conquered a town and the soldiers are all dead, they're allowed to take these women and have sex with them and sell them or whatever they want. A battle came, they eventually won a battle where they captured everyone. They captured the men and the women. And so now it wasn't just, hey, we know because of the Quran says that we're allowed to have sex with these women. It was, we've captured the women and their husbands. So if we have sex with these women, isn't that adultery? Yeah. And so this is in Sunan Abu Dawud and Sahih al-Bukhari and so on. The Muslims went to Muhammad and said, we're worried about having sex with these women who have husbands here. That's what Surah 4, verse 24 of the Quran was revealed to answer. That's the question. Do we get to have sex with these women when their husbands are still alive? And the verse revealed is, also forbidden to you are women who are already married, except those whom your right hands possess. So, of course you can't have sex with married women unless you've captured them. And so it was perfectly acceptable. And so, again, I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt here and saying, you don't get from that to lock a bunch of captives up in a room and then just go in and have as much sex with them as you want. But they are kind of yours to do what you want with sexually. And so, even though that's not what Muhammad and his companions were doing, I don't think they had a setup like that. I think it was more, you take your captive with you and she's your slave. and then you also get to have sex with her, but you're the one she's having sex with. And if you eventually want to sell her, or give her away, or trade her, then someone else can do that. But it's not everyone coming in and doing it, all the time. Whereas ISIS is doing that. So let me put it this way: if I were a Muslim, I would not do that. In other words, if I were a Muslim and I decided to become a jihadi and go join a foreign terrorist group, and I'm trying my hardest to follow what Islam commands, I wouldn't go to one of those houses where they have all their sex captives locked up, because I would be wondering if I'm supposed to be doing that as a Muslim. So that's about what I would say.
In the early 1800s, the Barbary pirates captured and imprisoned a lot of Western nations, particularly the young American nation, and in order to return the captives, tribute had to be paid. I'm interested, you don't seem to read much these days about the Muslim aspect of that and the jizya. Is that because of political correctness?
Well, yeah, I mean, almost everyone who tries to explain jihad and so on says that this is a recent development, and it's a response to Israel, to the United States blowing things up and things like that, and that's where this comes from. It doesn't work like that. It goes back to the time of Muhammad. You see it all the way down through history. And I think what you have is also in the 1800s, you had this group of scholars. They're generally called Orientalists, but that sounds more offensive than it was today. That just means people who study the East, right? So it has nothing to do with Asians or something like that. The Orientalists were the people who study Eastern cultures. But there was a strong tendency among them and among many scholars in general to really look down upon what the West has done. And the West had done a lot of awful things, right? But people were still saying how great the West was. And so the tendency was, no, we really need to drive it home how bad we are until people get it through their heads. And the tendency among the scholarly elites for a long time, and even still today, is to sort of glorify anything from the East and to just put down anything from the West. And so this is important because lots of Muslims now, one of their main apologetics tactics is to quote scholars from the 1800s. Look at how they're praising Muhammad and what a wonderful man he was and stuff. Of course, they praised anything. They praised anything that was not Western, American, or European culture. And I think this sort of flowed out of that, because that eventually led to the 1900s, where the people who were educated on those books, on those earlier books, start seeing like the West as the source of the problems, and other people as just reacting to the problems. And you see this, for example, with the Crusades, down through the centuries. From an Islamic perspective, the Crusades were these couple of skirmishes where Westerners, Crusaders, came to the Middle East and they lost. They fought and they lost. They won some battles, but they eventually lost. And that was that. You fought and we won. And now it's this Western civilization went and attacked the Muslims who were just defending themselves. Whereas historically, they were invading in the East, they had invaded through the West, through Spain. There were pirate havens all along the coast of Europe where people would have things stolen from them, and then you would have to pay money to get back your daughter or something like that. And the reasoning was, and if you wanted to travel to some holy site, most of the holy sites for Christians were in the Middle East. If you wanted to travel with these, you were going to be kidnapped, and you were going to be sold for ransom and so on. And so the idea was, no, we need to take the fight over there instead of just sitting here while they attack. Now, just to be clear, awful, horrible, disgusting things done in the Crusades. I'm talking about historically, up until about 1800, that sort of thing was understood, right? It's hey, there are all these attacks, and they decided to bring the fight to them, and then ended up doing some really horrible things, but it was a reaction. Whereas now, it's, no, the Muslims were minding their own business, living in peace, and the evil Europeans went to attack them and try to kill them all and slaughter them all, and Muslims just defended themselves. And so it's that kind of shift that you have that's just, we just don't talk about anything that conflicts with that overall picture. And so that's just what you hear about. And if you say, if you say what actually happened, like with the Barbary pirate, anyway, you can pick any century this is going on. If you say what actually happened, well, why are you bringing that up? It seems like you've got an agenda here, trying to bring up this war, this what these guys are doing over here, and you sound like a white supremacist, right? That's what it is. Not just, hey, let's try and be accurate about here so we can form accurate assessments. Horrible things have been done on this side, horrible things have been done on that side. Acknowledge all the horrible things so that we can, not repeat the same mistakes. So.
All right, we got time for one more question, so this will be the last question.
In the book of Revelation, it speaks about how there will soon be a one world government and eventually a one world religion. I'm sure you'll agree with me also that Islam has some religious aspect, but it also has a legislative ethics, for example, namely Sharia law. Given the current trend of Islam, projected to become the most dominant religion in a few decades, 50, 60 years, some studies projected. What are your thoughts concerning this matter? For example, this humongous migrant crisis we see going on all throughout Europe, the appeasement of Muslims with the PC culture every time there's a terrorist attack going on, and the pseudo-blasphemy laws going on that is being passed. For example, I think one just recently got passed in Canada. So what are your thoughts on this matter as far as the prophecy being fulfilled in the book of Revelation concerning Islam and the current world trends?
There are a lot of issues there. I'll start with the prophecy, namely to say that not my area. Prophecy of Revelations, just never gotten into it. Not because I don't think it's important, because there are other people who, that's something I look at and say, you have to dedicate a lot of time if you want to understand that. And meanwhile, I've got atheists over here and jihadis over here and trying to have a discussion. For something like that, I would say Joel Richardson, I know, has written several books. I know Joel. But I will say this: if you're talking about one world government or one world religion or something like that, that's prophesied in Islam. Muhammad said that he had been shown the ends of the world. The ends of the world were brought together for him. The east and the west were all brought together for him, so that Allah showed him that his ummah, Muhammad's followers, would rule over everything. So Islamic prophecy is that Islam is going to dominate the entire world. And that's why you hear it so often. Islam is the world's fastest growing religion. Islam is going to dominate. That's why you see signs among the jihadis. Islam will dominate the world, and so on. That's based on prophecy. And so if it goes in that direction, it's certainly going to be confirmation for both Islam and Christians are going to be looking at it. In other words, Muslims look and say, hey, we're growing, we're dominating. Christians are looking back going, that's exactly what Jesus and his followers said was going to happen, right? So that's one issue, and that's the extent of what I would say there. As far as the growth of Islam, most Muslims don't understand this. They think that all the growth is because of conversions. The bulk of the growth is due to birth rates, higher birth rates. So even in Europe, even in Europe, America, and everywhere else, that there are Muslims and other groups. Muslims have the highest birth rates among the groups. And the general reason for that is the impact of Islam on women, right? In other words, if you can't even drive, like in Saudi Arabia or something like that, there aren't a lot of opportunities for you in life. And so you get married when you're 12 or 13 or something like this, you start having babies, and by the time you're done, you've had 12 or 13 babies. If you are somewhere else and you're a woman and you go to college and then you go get a job and then you have a baby, you end up having like 2 babies or 1 or something like that. And so you just end up with much lower birth rates. And so Muslims have high birth rates wherever you go. And this is the reason for the sort of exploding growth of Islam. There are conversions, but the bulk of the growth is due to birth rates. Now, as far as and by the way, the Pew Research, which is the group that projected that by the 50s or 60s, that's where Islam passes Christianity and becomes the most dominant group in the world. They even said in that, this is primarily birth rates. So, and by the way, this is just straightforward mathematics. You can take a group that's smaller than another group. If they grow much faster due to birth rates, they eventually outnumber you. It's a matter of time. It might be 30 years, might be 50 years, might be 100 years. If their growth rate is high enough, they will eventually outnumber you. So that's something to consider. The question is, are those birth rates going to decline? So, for instance, if more opportunities were available to Muslim women in those places, then you would expect the birth rates to decline. So the question is something going to change? As far as Islam taking over the world, or laws outlawing speech against Islam, I think those kinds of things. Well, one, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Islam is going to dominate, because I understand human nature, and yes, people are lulled to sleep about this. If you keep pushing them enough, Western nations are democracies. They will elect people to do what they want. And so if Islam becomes enough of a threat, people will vote for people who see it as a threat, and will do something about that. Or there will be a violent reaction. And the reason I'm saying this is I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see the violent reaction against Islam. I don't want to see World War III, where it's the Islamic world versus everyone else, and everyone's killing each other. And that's why I believe apologetics is important, right? That's why I believe in what Ratio Christi is doing. We discuss these things. We need to get into a mode where we discuss them and not fight over them. But not just a superficial discussion where we pretend that we're addressing, like an interfaith dialogue where we just praise each other and pretend there's no problem. Actually get to the root of the problems. Because I don't think Islam can stand up to criticism. And so once it's perfectly acceptable to criticize Islam, to talk about Muhammad and to talk about the Quran, and there's a general atmosphere of people know the basics about Islam, I don't think you're going to see anyone converting to it. And the reason I say that is I've never met a person who converted to Islam after studying it. Not one. I've met tons of converts to Islam. And every time I would have a debate, I would meet converts to Islam. They would come up to me, I converted to Islam. Why are you saying that? Every last one of them, I start asking, why'd you convert to Islam? They give me utter nonsense. I'm not saying that to be mean, right? You can convert to Christianity for utter nonsense, right? You could convert to Christianity for dumb reasons. I'm saying I have never met someone who said, yes, I converted to Islam. I said, oh, why'd you do that? Well, I read the Quran, and then I went through the historical background. I read the Hadith. I've never heard that. It was never, hey, I read a bunch of Muslim sources. And I kind of conclude that if you read the Muslim sources, you just don't convert. Right? You might convert and then read the Muslim sources, but that's not why you converted. And so I can conclude based on that people generally don't convert for learning accurate information about Islam. They convert after hearing false claims made about Islam. And so once those are dispelled, I don't think you'll see many converts to Islam. I think you'll see lots of converts away from Islam, because this is something I've seen over and over again. Sometimes you have a person and you talk, you debate them and you present all this information, and they remain Muslim. And that happens. But a lot of times, wow, I've never heard any of this before. I need to seriously investigate this. And many of those leave Islam. And so, as far as Islam taking over the world, now, as far as fulfillment of prophecy, maybe, or something like that. If I'm just looking at the world, I don't see Islam taking over, because even if there are high birth rates, Muslim nations just aren't powerful enough, right? Because, and the reason I say that is because there is this fighting at the core of Islam. Islamic civilization doesn't form very stable country. I mean, look at the situation. They either have someone like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Assad or someone like that in charge, someone that everyone's terrified of. Or they end up with civil wars and stuff like this, and everyone starts killing each other, and the civilization crumbles and goes back to, it's like pre-industrial now. I mean, there's just rubble everywhere. And so as far as these countries are never going to come and compete with Western countries. These countries are not going to go conquer Russia or conquer the United States or anything else. So the question is, could they grow fast enough in certain areas to take over an industrialized country that could? I just don't think they have that stability. Right? I mean, when you think about the amount of money that goes into the Middle East and so on, they should be able to do almost anything they want, and they just do not end up with modern countries that could compete with the military of any other country. So it's, when I talk about the fighting and the fighting of unbelievers, remember there was that element of fighting hypocrites. And in most countries, you either have just complete Sunnis who are all in agreement or something like that. As soon as you start having groups that disagree with each other, when they have an opportunity, they usually end up fighting. And so I don't see any homogenous group taking over a country and not fighting and ultimately destroying the country. And so, again, if it's a spiritual thing or something like that, and some Muslim could arise who could gather support around him or something like that and get everyone to agree with him, that would be something. As far as just looking at world trends and statistics and birth rates and how things are going in recent elections and so on, I don't think Islam has the kind of stability at its core, because it's so violent. And when I say this, by the way, this is historical. After Muhammad died, his followers started killing each other. Abu Bakr had to launch what are called the apostate wars, right? He went around killing people who were not fully in line. And he said, if you don't give to me a piece of rope that you used to give Muhammad, I'm coming to kill you. Right? Notice, if you were just paying your zakat wrong, he's coming to kill you. Why is this important? What does the leader of ISIS name himself? Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Abu Bakr of Baghdad. Right? What does he do? He cracks down on all hypocrisy. Anyone who's not following Islam completely, you have to die. Why? That's what Muhammad's closest companion did when Muhammad died. So some Muslims disagreed with them, and they started fighting each other. By the time you get to the fourth caliph, Ali, who was married to Muhammad's daughter, Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, leads an army to fight Ali. It's called the Battle of the Camel. You can type in Battle of the Camel, and anywhere, just type it into Google. Aisha marched out an army against Ali. Aisha was called the Mother of the Faithful. That's her title in Islam. Ali is called the Commander of the Faithful. That's his title in Islam. The Mother of the Faithful marched an army against the Commander of the Faithful, and about 10,000 Muslims died in bloody combat. Muslims on both sides were Muhammad's companions. And so that's what I mean when the very first generation of Muslims almost annihilated itself with violence. The very first generation. The sort of group that would conquer the world would be a group like the first generation, bent on fighting. It would be an ISIS, though, if you're going to go out and conquer, or something like that. But history shows that very first generation almost annihilated itself with fighting. They barely made it because there was so much fighting and so much killing. That's the inherent instability that's caused when your prophet tells you that, hey, the way to solve problems is generally through violence. If your wife gets out of line, you beat her. If someone leaves Islam, you chop his head off. What's the penalty for this? Lashes. What's the penalty for that? Beheading. What's the penalty for this? Stoning. And violence is the solution for almost anything. And you're commanded to kill hypocrites. And notice, if you can kill a hypocrite, and Muhammad says you have no real faith until you completely obey Muhammad and you have no resistance in yourself, you can accuse almost any Muslim of being a hypocrite. Because you can always find something in the sources and say, you're not obeying that. You're a hypocrite. And so that's why you get this endless fighting and killing. And just to be clear, I'm glad most Muslims aren't doing that. What I'm saying is, in order for there to be a unified group that could go out and do some world conquering, they would have to have a lot of agreement and not be fighting and killing each other. And we just don't. From the time of Muhammad on, we just don't see that. Historically, they end up fighting. And so, in terms of revelation, maybe in terms of what I see in the world and what I see in the history of Islam, I don't think it's going to conquer the world. That's what I'm saying. And just to be clear, as far as free speech laws and so on, that's why it's so important to stand against free speech laws. I mean, against laws that condemn certain kinds of speech. specifically criticisms of Islam. Because one of the things that has made the West great is that our default mode, when we have disagreements, is to discuss and argue about them and debate them. And that might get messy, we might end up yelling, something like that, but we don't end up killing each other. And people don't understand this because there are lots of places in the world where, hey, you disagree with them, they start chopping off each other's heads. There are places like that. Okay? So if what we have developed in the West is, no, we'll sit there arguing about it, but we are all protected here. The government protects us all. We can sit here arguing until our faces turn blue. We still are not going to kill each other over these things. And if you do, you're out of here. You're going, right? So that has been preserved, right? And then if you have, no, you can't talk about this anymore. Well, guess what? There are people who, they see a terrorist attack and they start getting worried and they want to do something in response. What you would want a person like that to do is start talking about it. Start talking about what they're worried about, and then you can have a discussion. You don't want the person saying, hey, I'm worried about this terrorist attack. I'm going to go kill a bunch of Muslims. You don't want that. But guess what? If you find out you're not allowed to talk about something anymore, then people who get worried about something, they're going to do something else, right? So you don't want to end the default mode in the West being, if you're really upset about something, complain about it, talk about it, argue about it, but don't go kill anyone. And once you close that off, no, keep your mouth shut. And then the tension builds, and then you get a bloodbath. So the point is that going through what Islam teaches about these things, there are lots of people who say, oh, no, if you're going to criticize Muhammad or you're going to talk about jihad, you're calling for the deaths of Muslims. I think it's actually the complete reverse. When you start silencing all criticism and not letting people discuss these things, I think that's what eventually leads to a bloodbath, because people can't talk about anything and can't discuss anything, and people, if they get frustrated and upset enough, will do something else. So I think it's in the best interest, not just of Western, but of Muslims and the entire Muslim world, to really look into these things, to discuss these things, to have public debates about these things. And really this, and I'll just conclude with this, this is something that happened when I first got started. Christian apologist Mike Licona had a debate at University of California, Davis. And the Muslims there started yelling Allahu Akbar and shouting. And all they were doing was debating whether Jesus rose from the dead. They're talking about Jesus, and he felt like he was getting shouted down, and so on. And the following semester, I went there, and the debate was Muhammad a true prophet? And I started talking about Muhammad having sex with a 9-year-old girl and all these kinds of things. And at the end, I go down, and the Muslims there invite me to IHOP. Now, before this, Waleed Shubat had showed up, and he got shut down. I mean, they either got shut down or they tried to shut him down. They kept standing up and so on to disrupt the event. And we get to me being the most offensive, and hey, let's go have pancakes. Right? Now, why am I saying that? Right? You go from shouting people down for talking just about the resurrection, Allahu Akbar, to trying to disrupt the event, to, oh, he said a lot more about Muhammad, let's have pancakes. I'm saying this because if you've never heard anything critical of your view, which is what Mike was saying, he's saying Islam is wrong about Jesus on this issue, and you can't handle that, you try to start yelling things. Then if you get someone like Waleed Shubat, who's more critical and saying meaner things, and you have to learn to deal with that. Well, guess what? After you've dealt with that numerous times, you learn, hey, we don't need to get that upset over this. We can actually sit here and listen to this guy say these things and listen to our guy say these other things, and we don't have to get too upset. We can go have pancakes afterwards. So the point is, people can learn very quickly that we can have discussions about even sensitive topics and not get violent over them. That never happens if you're not allowed to talk about the things in the first place. You never make that first step. If the message is, oh, this offends you, well, we're going to make laws saying these guys can't talk about it anymore. That tells you that you don't have to be part of this whole situation where we actually talk about issues and discuss them and so on. That's a no-no. And that is the dangerous route. When a society learns you don't talk about these issues, then they never learn to talk about issues. And when they never learn to talk about those things, then the natural reaction is to react with violence because he's talking about something he's not allowed to talk about. And we're certainly not going to respond with speech because that's not what you do. And so that's how you end up with, that's why I think those are very, very dangerous route to go with the M103 bill in Canada and so on. Anyway.
This is on. Thank you, Dr. Wood, for coming all the way down from New York to have the conversation with us. I hope that everyone feels satisfied with the answers that were given. I'm sure he'll still be standing around for a few minutes if you have any more questions to bombard him with. Again, we are Ratio Christi. We meet on Monday nights. Right now we meet in Lucy 141 at 6:30. We will continue to be meeting throughout the summer, and high school students, college students, and adults are all welcome over the summer. Monday nights here is kind of just college students and adults because not many high school students can make it. But over the summer, anyone is welcome. And coming up in the next few weeks till the end of the semester here on campus, we're going to be talking about Christian theology, kind of surrounding Calvinism and Arminianism. But thank you guys all for coming. I know that it was kind of seemed like a long haul, but I know that there was so much I learned and so many fantastic things that were said. Again, Dr. David Wood has a fantastic YouTube channel. I would say the majority, if not all of this material can be found, hundreds of YouTube videos. Thank you guys for coming and have a nice night.